Schöne Menschen auf dem Velo, und ich sehe Velo, der wieder suchen, sagen Hallo. Schöne Menschen auf dem Velo.
So, in 20 minutes it will be 9 o'clock here in Switzerland. Welcome to the German-speaking part of Europe. My name is Stefan Seidel, SMS on Wikipedia and social media. I'm a former field correspondent of workingdocument.com 10 years ago. So I'm expecting in 20 minutes Chris Carlson from this movement Critical Mass, and I would like to talk to him about the definition of Xerocacy. I don't know the term at all, and I'm very excited that he is so spontaneously to talk with me about it. You hear my English is quite bad and poor, I guess you say, but hopefully it makes fun. I saw this 7-minute video from Peru, I guess. He is a very patient person and is used to talk in plain English. And if you want to join, I will give right now the link in the video description, so you can come in and talk. Perhaps I start first in this way, but later on I would like to open, and if you have some questions, please come in. So, and if you watch this video later on, exactly, so I said, give me 20 minutes more, and then Chris hopefully will be here. This is our song in Zurich. Wonderful people on the musical. Have fun!
Schöne Menschen vom Velo, und ich sehe an der Velo, ideal, und stiege die Sego, und ich kann nicht sehen, ob sie Zeit kommt schon noch. Und es soll der Gegner sein, wie die Jungen, und es soll noch ein Befehl. Und sie hat sich wohl in die Fertig gesehen, alles so nach oben her, verstanden, wie ich sehe. Ich kriege einen Nacken für diese Problem. Schöne Menschen vom Velo, und ich sehe an der Velo. Schöne Menschen vom Velo, und ich sehe den Velo, in der Sonne, sage Hallo. Schöne Menschen vom Velo, und ich sehe den Velo, in der Sonne, sage Hallo, aber du bist schon lang verdient. Schöne Menschen vom Velo, sie machen Hallo, und überall so heißt die Sache, wenn ich will, in den Medien ist Drama, man fliegt wieder mit der Autobahn. Wenn ich überklitsche, da ich abgeholt, es gibt so viel Krieg, aber sie sind immer bekannt. Der Wasser wegspritzt und das komische Lokalt, nur du in der Menge bist wie auf dem Mund. Schöne Menschen, die will man nicht sehen, aber sehen, aber sehen. Schöne Menschen, die
And let's start with this one again.
Schöner Mensch und Verbindung, sehr Demo, die Ideale, stiegen die Seko, all die Kreuzchen, das sie kommt schon, alles andere geht wie du, aber du bleibst bewegen, was jetzt am Boden befriedigt ist, alles umkommen, schon mal wieder sehen, ich kenne einen, vergiss so Problem, schöner Mensch und Verbindung, und ich sehe dir mal, der will es so, sag hallo. Schöner Mensch auf dem Velo, und ich sehe dich auf Velo, hell wie eine Sonne, sage hallo, aber du bist schon lang vorbei. Schöner Mensch auf dem Velo, sie macht Palla, fällt überall, das so heiß wie Sauermann, wenn ein Velo brennt, dann geht jedes Drama, unbefragt hinter mit Traum und Obama, wenn ein Schieber klebt, schreit alle gerade kalt, sie zagen hin, aber sie bleiben kalt, der Wasser verschmutzt, das Unschuld knallt, der Mann ist in Aufregung, schöner Mensch auf dem Velo, und ich sehe dich auf Velo, hell wie eine Sonne, sage hallo. Schöner Mensch auf dem Velo, und ich sehe dich auf Velo, hell wie eine Sonne, sage hallo, aber du bist schon lang vorbei. Schöner Mensch auf dem Velo, und ich sehe dich auf Velo, hell wie eine Sonne, sage hallo, hallo. Schöner Mensch auf dem Velo, und ich sehe dich auf Velo, hell wie eine Sonne, sage hallo, aber du bist schon lang vorbei. Schöner Mensch auf dem Velo, und ich sehe alle Demo, die Ideale, stiegen die Seko, und ich kann nicht sehen, sie Zeit kommt schon noch, alles andere geht wie du, aber der Ruhe, das ist ein Befehl. Sie hat sich wohl irgendwie fertig gesehen, alles so mich um einen verstummen will ich sehen, ich finde an die Gaufe, die sind die Probleme. Schöner Mensch auf dem Velo, und ich sehe alle Demo, schöner Mensch auf dem Velo, und ich sehe dich auf Velo, hell wie eine Sonne, sage hallo, hallo. Schöner Mensch auf dem Velo, und ich sehe dich auf Velo, hell wie eine Sonne, sage hallo, aber du bist schon lang vorbei. Schöner Mensch auf dem Velo, sie macht Palla, und überall so heiß wie Sauermann, wenn ein Schuh in den Medien ist Drama, überfüllt wieder mit Traum und Obama, wenn ein Schieber klebt, steht alle gerade kalt, es gibt so Verkehr, aber sie wieder kalt, der Wasser wegspritzt und das komische knallt, nur du in der Menge bist nicht auf dem Boot. Schöner Mensch auf dem Velo, und ich sehe alle Demo. Schöner Mensch, und ich sehe alle Demo.
The links to these songs are in the description of the video.
Schöne Handschuhe von Velo, und ich sehe dir wieder, der wie eine Sonne, sage Hallo. Schöne Handschuhe von Velo, und ich sehe dir wieder, der wie eine Sonne, sage Hallo. Aber du bist schon lang vorbei. Schöne Handschuhe von Velo, und ich sehe an der Demo, deine Ideale, und steht dir die Sekunde, und ich kann jetzt nicht, wo sie kommt schon.
Hello to my bicycle.
Sage Hallo. Schöne Handschuhe von Velo. Und ich sehe dir wieder, hell wie eine Sonne, sage Hallo, aber du bist schon lang vorbei. Schöne Handschuhe von Velo, so heiß wie so warm, wenn ich überbringe, geht es kaum, und befragt der Mitra oder Mama, wenn ich überklebt, schnell alle ich halt kommen, so wie sie bleiben kalt, der Wasser wegspritzt, bis du mich schon knapp, und dann habe ich schon viel. Schöne Handschuhe von Velo, und ich sehe dir wieder, hell wie eine Sonne, sage Hallo. Schöne Handschuhe von Velo, und ich sehe dir wieder, hell wie eine Sonne, sage Hallo, aber du bist schon lang vorbei. Schöne Handschuhe von Velo, und ich sehe dir wieder, hell wie eine Sonne, sage Hallo. Schöne Handschuhe von Velo, und ich sehe dir wieder, hell wie eine Sonne, sage Hallo, aber du bist schon lang vorbei. Schöne Handschuhe von Velo, und ich sehe an der Demo, die Ideale, und steht dir die Sekunde, und ich kann nicht sehen, wo sie Zeit kommt schon noch. Aber so geht es mir wie du mir, und der Pula muss einfach einen Befehl. Und sie hat sich wohl die Befehle in der See, alles um mich herum verstummen, wie ich sehe. Ich in der Hand, und vergiss mein Problem. Schöne Handschuhe von Velo, und ich sehe an der Demo,
On fire.
Schöne Menschen von Velo, und ich sehe Velo, Velo, in der Sonne, sag hallo. Schöne Menschen von Velo, und ich sehe Velo, Velo, in der Sonne, sag hallo. Aber du bist schon lange verdient. Schöne Menschen von Velo, sie machen Mama, und überall so heiß wie Sauer. Wenn ich mit den Medien ist Mama, aber viel wieder mit der Mama. Wenn ich über Klick steht oder ich Report, es gibt so viel, aber sie lieber kommt, der Wasser wegspritzt und das Gummi schon kalt, nur du wieder eine Stimme auf dem Mund. Schöne Menschen von Velo, und ich sehe an der Schöne Menschen, und ich sehe
So, last one, huh?
Schöne Menschen von Velo, und ich sehe Velo, Velo, der wieder so, sag hallo. Schöne Menschen von Velo, und ich sehe Velo, Velo, der wieder so, sag hallo. Aber du bist schon lang vorbei. Schöne Menschen von Velo, und ich sehe an der Demo, die Ideale steigen die Sego, da die Qualität, sie kommt schon, alles vergeht zusammen wie Domino, Roboter und Bullen sind nur auf Befehl, wo sie jetzt einmal eine Freude gesehen, alles umkommen, verstummen will ich sehen, die Kinder haben mich und vergiss so Problem. Schöne Menschen von Velo, und ich sehe Velo, Velo, der wieder so, sag hallo. Schöne Menschen von Velo, und ich sehe Velo, Velo, hell wie eine Sonne, sag hallo, aber du bist schon lang vorbei. Schöne Menschen von Velo, sie macht Polla Polla, bald überall so heiß wie Sauer. Wenn ich überbrennt, dann leg ich ins Kammer, und befliegt hinter mit Tram und Obama. Wenn ich überklebt, schnell, weil ich halt kalt, es gibt so viele hier, aber sie bleiben kalt. Der Wasser wegspritzt, das Gummi schon knallt, und du in der Menge ist nicht auf Jod. Schöne Menschen von Velo, und ich sehe Velo, Velo, der wieder so, sag hallo. Schöne Menschen von Velo, und ich sehe Velo, Velo, hell wie eine Sonne, sag hallo, aber du bist schon lang vorbei.
Yeah, hi.
Wow, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Hey, great. You are so spontaneously. That's crazy.
Well, I had you on my calendar, so it's easy to do.
It's great. Hey, yeah, let's get straight to the point. Chris, I didn't know this term Xerocacy 14 days ago. So I start to look around, and I really would love to hear from you. When did you start with this term? So perhaps you saw this on the English dictionary.
You know, I tell you that it's a word that I made up a long time ago, as we say in English, a neologism.
Yeah.
It's a combination of obviously the Xerox machine, the photocopying machine, and either bureaucracy or aristocracy or monarchy or any kind of a democracy, whatever you want to call it.
Wow.
So it's a combination. It's basically an idea that anybody in a modern world has access to a copying machine somewhere nearby. You can go and make some free copies. And so the idea is to put your ideas down on a piece of paper, hopefully creatively with some art and or thoughtful writing, and make them available to people. And so the idea for critical mass was that people were showing up with their opinions on pieces of paper and handing them out. And we realized that that was essentially what was determining what was happening. The ideas that were being discussed and argued on pieces of paper were running the show, as it were. So that was why we came up with this idea of Xerocracy. It was sort of a informal way of describing how we were self-managing our experience. The truth is that not that many people were doing it. I mean, there was perhaps at the peak a couple of dozen people who had contributed to the culture through that kind of process.
Yeah.
And some people were doing it every month. They would show up. I remember one friend who since died. He was making a whole zine every single week, every single month. They'd make a huge zine. So on last Wednesday and Thursday nights, he was staying at the copy shop overnight, copying and copying and copying to hand out this zine called Broken Spoke. Oh, you know, can you excuse me for a minute? Can I stop? Because somebody's at my front door.
They are all welcome.
Okay, I'll be right back.
Ja, cool. Oi, das ist ja ein schneller Einstieg. He's talking much faster, so I hope I will get. Oh, is this a Xerox? So I guess. No, it's okay. Yeah, thanks.
Hi, sorry about that.
No problem at all. We are not doing a show or something like this. Did you see this in this is Wiki Dictionary? Did you see this?
No.
They started with October 78. With
Interesting. Is that because they took the name of the machine from that time?
Yeah, hundreds of thousands of copies of the letter were distributed in Europe. So it has something to do with. Let me ask you: did you, when the copy machine popped up, did you say, "Can you give me a Xerox," or did you say, "Can you make a copy of it?" Or
it was very common here to call it a Xerox for a long time, and now we call it a copy more often. But yeah, for many years, Xerox dominated the field, and most of the machines people had were Xerox machines. So yeah, that does go back to the 1970s when the first copying machines appeared. And then I would say that I had a long experience in that world before Critical Mass ever started in the 90s. I was publishing an underground magazine called Processed World. And before we did Processed World magazine, we were doing flyers. That is to say, Xeroxes, copies that we would hand out to people that were called Inner Voice number 1, Inner Voice number 2, which is a joke in English on invoice. So when you make a bill for somebody, you call it an invoice. So then we called it the inner voice, which means the voice inside of you that's speaking to your conscience or something like that. And then we made flyers. Some of those you can see on our website at foundsf.org. You can go and look for the early early Xerox materials from both Processed World and from Critical Mass.
Which one? This Found?
Found SF, FOUND SF.org.
Here it is.
Yep. And then if you go to theme, one of those buttons right there, you can choose bicycling, and you can get to all the early bicycling flyers. The early Critical Mass flyers are there from the first 2 years under bicycling.
Oh, yeah. Great.
And so if you go down, there's going to say something, see right there, Critical Mass Xerocracy, 92, 93, under C, go down to C. So right there, Xerocracy 92, 93, and 94. So that's all the Critical Mass stuff. There's also these other ones, the inner voices are somewhere else. I forget where I put them, but they're floating around.
And the Massifesto. Okay. Yeah, we were. I told you the guys here in Zurich, they want to translate your book.
Sure, great.
So you don't know someone in German who is already doing it?
No. It was some people were going to do it in Argentina in Spanish. It has been it was already published in Italy, and I think some parts of it have been published in Portuguese in Brazil, but not the whole book.
So I hope they will do it in German. Mm-hmm. Cool. So, okay, when I asked you to make this this definition, you made the proposal. My English, you have to excuse me. Opinion
no problem.
Through free photocopying and distribution.
Yeah.
Opinion shaping. In German, I didn't know this. There is a list of Herrschaftsformen, of ruling of power. A list of power. I don't know how to say in English. So these are all these words you had before.
Different kinds of rule. Yeah, sure. Different kinds of political power systems.
Yes, and it's quite interesting. There is no other question in 303 Wikipedia languages who has a list like this. So for us, perhaps it's a German, I don't know, specialty to have this list in power, because we had so much suffering about power systems,
Sure, and generally Germans think very analytically too, unlike most of us.
Yeah, I think.
I guess you can add Xerocracy to the list.
There is no. I have right now a ban, so I have a ban in the German-speaking Wikipedia, so it's a little bit difficult. But in the English one, there is Xerocracy. Did you see it? Do you write Wikipedia?
I look at it once in a while. Our website that I just took you to, foundsf.org, is based on Wikimedia. It's the same software, but we are focused on San Francisco history, San Francisco and San Francisco Bay Area history. And so we cover social movements and ecology and art and politics and all sorts of things on our website. But we don't work through Wikipedia because we don't agree with the philosophy of Wikipedia, which has
different.
Well, they have a strange idea of a neutral point of view, and I don't think such a thing exists. So I don't really care about trying to adapt to their standards. I also don't agree with that everything needs to be sourced online in 3 locations. Like most of what's interesting about history is not online. And so if you add something new that's never been online before, you're not supposed to put that in Wikipedia yet.
Okay.
I also don't like what goes on behind the scenes at Wikipedia, which is the inclusionists versus the deletionists.
Yeah.
So I find that to be a rather tiresome struggle.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, let's see. My point would be that when I would have a definition of this Xerocacy, I guess it would have to start with ruled by Pababam, no?
Well, officially, that would be the logical idea, but the truth is that it never was about ruling, ever. It's not. It doesn't have that kind of weight or power. It's actually it's the opposite of rule. It's the proposal system of self-management. Somebody makes a proposal. It's easily shared by way of passing it around in copies and Xeroxes. And then if the proposal is popular, it's adopted through actual behavior as opposed to voting or some other kind of way of doing it. Popular acclaim and actually going about it. So in those early Xerocracy documents that I showed you on our website, you'll see that there's a proposed route many of those months in the early 90s in San Francisco. And there usually was one or two would show up at any given last Friday of the month. It would be, let's go here or let's go there. Let's explore the city in a different way. Yeah. And sometimes there would be a dispute over where to go. And so there would be a discussion or, sort of some sort of fake democracy moment where people would yell and scream about which way they wanted to go. And in the end of the day, people start to ride, and then whoever's in front and has the most energy leads the way. And if enough people behind the people in front don't like what they're doing, they can just break off and go in a new direction. So there's a level of spontaneous self-management that really overrules any proposals at the end of the day in all of these cases. So Xerocracy ended up being more useful for the circulation of opinions and suggestions for etiquette of ways of behaving and ways of not behaving, because people behave badly quite often in large movements. In particular, in critical mass, you have what we call the testosterone brigade, which is a lot of young men who have a kind of a false idea that there's a class war between cars and bicycles. You cannot have a class war between inanimate objects. Yeah. And so the real story is that we all use all kinds of transportation all the time. And we live in a society where we don't really have much choice about how the infrastructure is designed. It's been left to capital and the state to do that. And if we had our ability to democratically decide how to organize life, we might choose something rather different. And so in riding through the streets on bicycles and large numbers of people, we actually made a difference and the world changed. There's a lot more bicycle infrastructure today than there ever was before. So sometimes just doing something directly is the most effective way of doing it.
Yeah, of course. Chris, so in Wikipedia, you would be inclusionist. So because you would accept all different.
That's right. That's correct. Yeah.
Opinions or perspectives or whatever. Let me ask you, when do you share the flyers? What is so when you are on the bicycle and you are going, you will not share the flyers, right?
We have different kinds of flyers for different purposes. There were flyers that we handed out to each other at the beginning when we were gathering, which usually took an hour and a half. And many people didn't read them anyway. I mean, as time went on, this died, to be honest. It was very, very effective and important in the first few years of critical mass, but it died out completely. After 1997, there was never anything to speak of Xerocracy. So it was a relatively short-lived phenomenon.
You have a date for it, 1997. Wow.
Well, 97 was the year that the police attacked critical mass in San Francisco. They had a police riot. And after that, we did the Good Soldier Schweik ride, where we rode to rule. So we obeyed all the traffic laws, and it made traffic much, much worse, of course. And so after that, the police backed off, and people basically showed up in large numbers to go ride in critical mass for many years after that, all the way to the present, in fact. But the politics and the culture that involved itself in debate and discussion just completely vanished over time. So there's a lot of interesting points to be drawn from that. Well, I mean, one of the things that I found out the hard way was we celebrated the 20th anniversary in the year 2012.
Yeah.
And we did a book, that book that you showed that you want to translate, Shift Happens, that was published for that reason. And interestingly enough, as after we were finished with the whole two-week festival that we created, we'd had about almost 200 people came from around the world to celebrate with us, and we had 10,000 people riding in critical mass that Friday. But the truth was that all the other events we did, whether they were book release parties or film festivals or poetry readings or what have you, almost nobody local came to any of it. And what I realized is that the bicycle culture had died. There was no longer a bike culture in San Francisco. The bike culture had basically vanished precisely because so many people were on bicycles.
Yeah.
Paradoxically. So as you have more and more people using a bike, there's less and less reason to describe yourself as a bicyclist.
Yeah.
It's not like you would not call yourself a bedist because you sleep in a bed, or a hammerist because you use a hammer, or a microwavist because you use a microwave. Why would you call yourself a bicyclist because you use a bicycle?
Yeah.
So it's a weird fetishization of technology, which is very typical of Americans, but has been part of the sort of low-level grassroots ecology movement as well.
Yeah. Let's go back to 97. I also could say, okay, internet was there. Not 92, but 97, definitely.
Yeah, the internet had come along, during we started critical mass in 92, and the World Wide Web barely had started. It wasn't really part of our lives yet. We were on email, but we didn't have a web experience yet. But within a year, by 93, there was a web experience going on, and I started to see flyers that I had written in English appearing in other parts of the world in other languages. People were taking them and translating them. So that was my first experience of, oh, this is interesting. You can actually communicate across the world with this technology in a way that had been difficult to do before, because you had to make copies, or you had to publish a book or a magazine or whatever. And I'd done all those things up to the present as well. So yeah, the internet became a bigger part of it, and I think that's part of the death of bike culture also, was that people started to become much more insular, and especially in this current decade that we're just finishing, the terrible teens. Everybody spends all their time staring at their phone. They just barely lift their head out of their phone anymore. So the idea of actually having a public space, which is rare, and then a public space where you meet with people that you don't already know and talk to them openly and freely, that's a rare experience. It's hard to create that anymore. People do not crave it in the way that we once did, apparently.
Okay, so in the beginning, you had this copying when you are gathering, and in the end, or did you cork from the beginning?
Yeah, we figured that out pretty quickly, that corking was a good way to protect the safety of the ride. And we would run through red lights for the same reason. It wasn't about breaking the law. That was not the point of it. We did break the little tiny traffic laws that were there, but it wasn't in order to break the law that we did that. We did it to protect our safety and the safety of people that we were passing by. It was better for everybody if we kept moving and we stayed in a group. So that was really kind of a practical matter more than anything else. But that got, the police and the authorities and the media tended to really make a big deal about, oh, you're breaking the law, you're breaking the law, you're a bunch of anarchists. Like, well, yeah, we are a bunch of anarchists, but it wasn't. The law was not important to us one way or the other. It was just, it didn't suit the needs of our experience. And our choice of how to behave was really done with respect for everybody who was in the streets together, and what was the best way we could manage our experience in the streets to enhance our good experience and everybody around us as well. The other point was, if you asked about the flyers, the other kind of flyer that we made, which you can see on the website, was a flyer to hand to people stuck in cars. So we had a flyer that said, "We're sorry." And then you would go through all these little explanations of why we're sorry. We're sorry we live in this world full of bad behavior and unfortunate ideas about how to get around. That everybody's stuck in private cars and so on and so forth. Somewhere down there, maybe on the next page, I can't remember where, but you'll come to it eventually. There's a "We're sorry" flyer, and that shows you about corking. That was this was put out like the second month. This one by another friend of mine, Joel Pomerantz, and anyway. So the idea was to give people something to read while we were going by, and that had sort of a sense of humor. So we were jokingly saying, we're sorry that we're blocking your traffic for a few minutes. We're sorry that you're stuck in your car again on a Friday like you are every day. And just happens today, you see bicycles going by. And we're sorry that we live in a world where this is an unusual experience for it to be out on a bicycle. And we're sorry you're not already here riding your bicycle with us. So we hope you'll join us next month, and then just give them this little clever thing to read.
Yeah.
And so that we hand that out to people as we went by. I had a ring with a bunch of these hanging off the ring. I could just tear it off and hand it to people as I went by.
Wow, cool. Yeah. So I have to confess, I was in the October, the first time on critical mass.
Yeah.
And I learned, I got flyers during the corking. Mm-hmm. So I saw the corking like speed datings. And so I started to cork whenever I could, because it was quite interesting to ask why you are bicycling here and what is your stuff. And so I get a lot of people know about because of the corking. So I really love this situation.
Yeah, it's anytime you have a chance to talk to people and explain what's going on or have a few minutes of human connection, that's the magic. That's the beauty of it.
Yeah. We also have to talk about reclaim the streets. How did you experience this movement, or is this together, or what do you think about this phase?
Well, I know some of the people who were very involved in that in England. John Jordan comes to mind, and a few other people who were very influential and wrote a lot of very beautiful texts describing the meaning of reclaim the streets.
What about her?
Yeah, she's fine too. And basically the idea that they were doing was very similar to what we were doing in certain respects, but the difference is that they were more sedentary. They would pick a location and then build a whole party in that intersection or around a given block. Whereas our idea was you don't want to stop because it's too easy to attack you. So you want to keep moving. And the idea that Critical Mass was doing was to essentially reclaim the streets, but to do it in motion. And by doing it in motion, you not only protect yourself from certain kinds of repression, but you also reinvent what the city is, because you're smelling it differently, seeing it differently, hearing it differently, and you're having a rather radical expansion of your imagination of what urban life could be. And Reclaim the Streets does that in a smaller scale. But what I didn't like about Reclaim the Streets, at least in its manifestations here in San Francisco and the Bay Area, was that it was essentially a rave. It was just a street party with very loud pounding music, and I just don't care about that. It's not interesting to me.
Yeah. And what about that Reclaim the Street probably had a certain message, and in Critical Mass you don't have a clear message. Is this a difference too?
Well, I'm not sure how clear the message was from Reclaim the Streets either, to be honest. I mean, there were people like John who wrote very eloquent, essays about what it meant, and I wrote some eloquent essays, and some other people did too, about Critical Mass and what it means. But that doesn't mean that the average person you would talk to, either in Reclaim the Streets or Critical Mass, could tell you what it means in the same way. They mostly could not. Yeah. And defining the meaning of our behavior is, one of the issues for politics. How do we define the meaning of our behavior, and how do you disseminate that definition so that it becomes the actual go-to explanation? That's a challenge. The mass media wants to define it as anarchic, law-breaking, bad behavior by angry young kids. And when you come to a ride, it's full of all these families and people of all ages, and it's not as racially diverse as it should be, but it was somewhat racially diverse at different moments. And certainly in other cities, it's more diverse than here, since we're a pretty homogenous city. And it's really just an issue about who controls the narrative, and it's a problem for every political movement and every political act. How do you define your behavior so that your definition is the explanation rather than the state's explanation?
Yeah, I was very surprised. I didn't believe it, but here in Zurich they do it also for a long time. You know it. You have it written down in your books.
Yeah.
But I was very impressed that it was so clear that there is no clear message. So this diversity, this inclusionism from yeah, I was very impressed about this point. So it's
Well, yeah, that's been a truth over here too. Is that if you go to critical mass and you ask people why are you here, you'll get a different answer from every person. There would be some overlap, but most of the time, everybody's got a unique explanation. Somebody's there to protest against, oil wars. Another person's there to protest against climate change. Another person's there because they just like riding their bike. Another person's there because they're looking for a new girlfriend or a new boyfriend. Every possibility of human behavior and human motivation is present, and that's part of what the magic of the experience was because we didn't define it narrowly. We didn't make people agree with a set of principles or a set of definitions. You just had to show up on a bike, and once you're there, you're in a group, and you can decide for yourself why you're there and what it means to you. And you're not right or wrong either way. It's just like it's a space. It's a new kind of public space, or was. I mean, to me, frankly, it's kind of past already. It's pretty much over. But there are places in the world where it's still quite vital. For instance, in Chile right now, the mass movements in Chile, which are on the cusp of some sort of revolutionary transformation of that society, hopefully. The bicycle movement is very strong there in various cities, especially in Santiago and in Valparaiso and a few other places in Chile. And many of those cycle activists that I met when I was down there are now super involved in these big protests and movements against the state and the police there.
I'm sorry.
No worries.
You see this tweet from that's the police of Zurich, the town of Zurich. Critical mass is not a demonstration.
What does it say it is?
For us, it is quite important. So it's critical mass is a form of action. It's a form of behavior. It's just traffic. But so I really loved this tweet from our police station. It is not a demonstration.
Yeah. Well, that's actually unusual because typically here they would say it is a demonstration. That's how the police have tended to manage it. So, people often have called me over the years and said, can you speak for critical mass, the organization or the movement? And it's like, well, first of all, there's no organization. Second of all, it's not really a movement either. It's an event, a recurrent event that happens once a month in many hundreds of cities around the world. And so every person who participates in it can speak for it, but nobody speaks for all of it.
Yeah, but I really love this tweet.
Yeah, it's funny.
Now, then in this 7 minutes video from Peru, or you gave me later on you had a speech next day, just a wonderful event I saw. You were talking about this question that it's not only about the movement of bicycling, it's go much more beyond it.
Well, for the last few years, I've been going
I can't hear you.
Oh, really? Well, everything's the same on my end. Am I back? I'm talking. Can you hear me?
Ho, ho, ho.
Ho, ho, ho. Hello. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay.
I can hear you now.
Okay, great. So the last few years, after 20, I mentioned in...
Wait.
Stop.
What is this?
Wow, strange.
Coming and going. Yeah, no, that's the internet for you.
I don't know. Can you say something?
Yeah, I can speak. I went to many cities of South America over the last few years, partly for my book, Nowtopia.
Oh, now I can hear you.
Okay. So I had the opportunity to go traveling to both, it's Lima, Peru, and Santiago, Chile, and Mexico City, where I gave a speech that was different each time, but relatively similar. I was trying to warn them that the bicycle is not enough. The bicycle itself is just a device. It actually has a dark history itself, going back to the 19th century and the rubber boom in the Amazon and Congo, and the horrible barbarism that produced. And so you have to understand the bicycle is an industrial device like any other. And if you're going to use it, that's fine. It's definitely better than using a car. It's better than a lot of other things. It has interesting social effects. But if you think about what you're fighting for, if you think about why you're excited about getting on a bicycle, it's not only bicycling. A bicycle is a doorway or a window. And if you have to, if you go up to the door or the window and you open it up, that's the bicycle. You're on the bike. Now you got to go through to the other side. And when you're on the other side, you realize that the bicycle is just a tiny piece of the question that we have to answer. The real story is, how do we produce life? Not just how do we move from here to there. That's important, but it's only one tiny part of what we have to address. And what we really have to address is everything. How do we produce life? How do we make shelters and homes for every person on the planet? How do we have good food and good clean water and decent communications and decent energy supplies and everything else for everybody that works together with the logic of nature and the planet? And right now we're not in harmony with that at all. We're doing everything wrong. And in fact, one of my deeper arguments is that we talk about, a lot of people on the left think that we should be clamoring for jobs or more work. I'm like, no, we need less work, not more work. We work way too hard already. And most of the work we do is a waste of time. It's absolutely not, it's either a waste of time or it's actively destroying the planet. And so what we need to do is have a grassroots democratic process of deciding what to do, how to do it, who to do it with and for, and then have an equitable sharing of the results of that work, which we do together anyway. Like today, we already produce the world together, but only a very few people decide how we do it, on what terms, and how we share the results of that huge collective process of producing the world. So we need to have that become radically democratized. And if we had everybody participating in that conversation, then I think we eventually will arrive at better decisions about how to make everyday life, how to make this world. Like when we get up in the morning, most of us are doing things all day long that we should not do. Banking, real estate, insurance, advertising, military production, the production of crappy things that break in 6 months instead of lasting for 100 years. I mean, what are we doing? We all work and we basically are rushing around frantically trying to find our way. And it's a huge waste of time and it's actually destroying the planet. So we should slow down and figure out how to live better and start doing the work that needs to be done.
This was exactly the thought. So I started with this definition because the next question would be, so what can I learn from critical mass, the way they organize themselves? So what is the point? And then I came to these flyers. So you have only less rules. You have a date, you have a time, you have a place where you start, and then you start and you go, and you get know other people with other opinions, and you can find friends and stuff like this. So this was exactly my point for this try of a definition,
Mm-hmm.
Because
well, it's a beginning. I mean, it's the idea is to try. Well, we've had many debates over the years about how could you take the logic of critical mass, this sort of interesting experience that's been fairly successful at replicating itself throughout the world. And how could you apply that more broadly? How could you apply it to some other part of life? And it turns out to be fairly difficult to do because there are unique characteristics about critical mass. It's a bicycling experience. It's a group experience of moving through a city. You can't.
Anarchy?
Sorry?
Anarchy?
It's anarchistic. It's not really. It's not formally anarchy, but it's a form of anarchistic behavior. It tends to be swarming and leaderless. And that is to say, different people assert leadership at different moments in various ways. And so all of those are things that you can sort of learn both positive and negative things from. I mean, one interesting example that came along many years after critical mass started, which was in 2011, the Occupy movement in the United States and the movements in the Arab Spring and stuff in Brazil with the transit and now what's going on. You can see it all happening again today in Lebanon and in Argentina and Chile and Bolivia, etc. There's a lot of experience people have had in critical mass rides of learning how to self-manage their activities in the heat of the moment under conditions of potentially danger and confusion. And that experience is extremely helpful for people learning how to take care of themselves and to take on difficult political problems going forward. They learn better to speak in public with each other. They learn how to negotiate tense situations with people who don't agree with them. All of those things are very helpful politically in the long run, and people have developed these skills. And for the most part, all the people that have had those experiences are still alive and are still able to apply them to other moments in their lives when those appear. Now, there's no automatic formula that you could say to start something else that's a social movement that we're interested in. Who knows what the catalyst is? Who knows what the spark is that brings that out at any given moment?
That's exactly my point, because I would say Linux. There is a network computer without Linux. Then you had Wikipedia. Then you had Creative Commons as a right system, a global right system. Then right now you have this Wikidata. So we have so many contexts now where we exactly work with this copy pasting of good practice, I would say. And we look to the bicyclist and say, oh, they need only 2 or 3 rules, and then it makes a lot of fun. Oh, let's try it. What would be these rules for our setting? You know what I mean?
Well, I think that's the right way to look at it. Is that you're asking the right questions, and so at any given moment, people should stop and ask those questions about what they're engaged with and what could they do to minimize the bureaucracy and minimize the hierarchy. And to maximize the fun, because we don't spend enough time concerning ourselves with how to enjoy things we do in life. We should not be suffering and sacrificing. We should be enjoying ourselves as much as possible and doing it together rather than alone.
Yeah, I think this is a very important point, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, Chris, I would say, I don't know, perhaps you would like to have a certain question, or would like to talk something about it. Otherwise, I would say, you know, the young guys here in Zurich, they were a little bit disappointed that we are both so spontaneously to meet each other. And it's, oh no, for us he is very important. We would like to have very good question to the professor. You know?
Well, I'm happy to help people with any questions they have. Anybody can always write me an email, or so we can always have another conversation like this. Yeah, but really, people exaggerate my role, frankly, and it's been sort of hilarious to me how often people want to give me all the credit or most of the credit for these experiences, which, frankly, were invented by dozens of people here in San Francisco together, and then reinvented by dozens of people in over 400 cities around the world since then. And it takes that level of participation and creativity for these things to happen. No one individual has that much influence in the end of the day. Yeah. So people should trust their own instincts, and they can learn a lot from studying, other behaviors and other things that are going on around them. But trust themselves. People need to trust their own good sense about how to change the world, because I don't have a good idea either, any better than the next person. If I had a better idea, I would have changed the world. So we do have to get on with that.
But on the other hand, it is also very important that there are people who can describe and give access to an idea and to explain. And I guess you do it just great. And
by the way, there's another book that you might want to introduce people to, which has been translated into Italian and Portuguese, also called Nowtopia. that one there, in the middle, the fourth one over. That one. And that one I would love to see get translated also into German if anybody's up for it. But that book talks about how hard people work when they're not at their stupid jobs. So most jobs, as we know, where you make money, are kind of dumb and nobody should do them, and they're just wasting our time. And people do them because they need money to pay their bills. And I get it. We all have those kind of sacrifices and compromises to make. But in this book, I was looking at how many people are involved in interesting projects that are when they're not making money, when they're working for free, not as workers, but as full human beings trying to change the world. So the subtitle, as you can see there, is How Pirate Programmers outlaw bicyclists and vacant lot gardeners are inventing the future today. And that what you see is, like, as you mentioned with Linux and these various software projects, there's a whole chapter on that in the book called The Virtual Spine of the Commons. There's a chapter on community gardens and how much food we could be growing in cities. There's a chapter on bicycles, bike kitchens and bike shops and all the kind of bicycle culture that exploded at a certain time.
Yeah.
There's a whole chapter even on Burning Man, which is a complicated cultural festival that happens here that has some interesting qualities, but is also pretty compromised. Anyway, everything's compromised. Nothing's perfect. But the book tried to look at a bunch of initiatives that people engage in that involve appropriating their time and their technological skills and repurposing them towards things that actually challenge and take on the real predicament we face, both the ecological crisis and the crisis of social anomie and boredom and meaning, etc. So we can actually change the world, and in many respects, we do every day engage in practices that help that process. So there is, as you said, an enormous number of examples of things that people are already doing right now that are the key to the new world that we want to live in. Now, how do we get those examples to become the dominant way of organizing life? That's a challenge for all of us. I don't have an answer any better than the next person, but the book was an argument in favor of that. And looking at trying to draw out the politics, the working class politics even, of a lot of those behaviors. Because when we're not letting ourselves be reduced to wage slaves, to workers for money, that's when we actually can change the world. Because we're now working because we care, because we're involved, because we're thoughtful people. And thoughtful people together can do anything.
Yeah, I think this economic crisis. Always, sometimes I say we have a ecological crisis, an economical crisis, and a communication crisis.
Yeah, that's true.
All three crises are global, and we are thinking about on a global level how would look like a good answer of this crisis. Is not a good narrative, I think, but
Well, it's a challenge anyway. We do have a great challenge before us. Is how to fix the world, how to change it so that we're not going to die. I mean, I'm not too worried about immediate dying, but the chances are that capitalism will solve its crisis by war is very high. That's how they've solved it in the past. And Germans know that better than anybody. So, not the Swiss, of course, but
no, that's great. So, okay, Chris, I will come back with wonderful young people here from Zurich, and I'm sure they will have a very intelligent questions to you.
Fair enough.
Speak a lot better English than I do.
Well, it was fine. We understood each other, I think, so we're good.
Just wonderful to get to know you. It's very inspiring what you are doing and what you are standing for. It's a pleasure to get you know. Thank you very much.
Thank you. By the way, do you know Hans Widmer by any chance?
Hans Widmer?
Yeah. He's been involved in a lot of writing. He wrote a book called, he writes under the name PM.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
PM, Lolo, Jesus,
Bolo and Sub Rosa and many other books. Yeah, he's an old friend of mine.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. I stayed with him back in 1990. Actually, I was passing through Zurich and I stayed with him. And I have other friends from Zurich as well.
So when you are back in Zurich?
Yeah, someday. Somebody has to buy my plane ticket. Then I'll come to Zurich again.
Okay, we should do that.
Yeah.
I will talk to Hans. I met him only once, but he's doing very important work here in Zurich. So this Genossenschaft, we call it, this movement with the 2,000 watt society, it is quite important. Yes. Hey, Chris, we hope really you will be in the summertime or in the spring 2020 in Switzerland. Why not?
That would be. I'd love to come. I have friends all over the country, in Ticino and in Bern and Geneva and everywhere. So I'd love to come.
We should do that.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, Chris.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Ciao.